Welcome back, fans, here to the Pro Wrestling Report Prime Time on My24 Milwaukee and the Fight TV app. Here sitting alongside a WWE Hall of Famer, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Welcome, sir, here to Milwaukee. And it is such a great time to have you here with us on the show because it's Wrestlemania season. And many people know, everyone knows, that you are a man who has been in many a great Wrestlemania matchup. But really, one of the greatest matchups in history, WrestleMania 3, between you and the Macho Man Randy Savage. What memories do you have of that matchup and the legacy that that matchup has created?
Well, you know, going in, both Randy and I, we heard that the show was going to be big, and just hearing the ticket sales at the live event at the Silverdome, you know, 50,000 sold, 60,000, 70,000. The buy rate for that pay-per-view was big, and you know, you got to give credit where credit is due. And when they did the matchup with Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan, that was huge. Yeah.
That's the match that sold the building.
That is the match that sold the building. It sold the pay-per-view, you know, and I'll say, you know, Randy and I had our hand in that too, when we did our deal with him coming off the top rope with the bell in my throat, you know.
I believe that was at the Survivor Series in Boston, perhaps.
Yes,
before.
and you know, adding to our flavor to WrestleMania 3.
Yeah.
But you know, we realized how big this was going to be, and I knew Andre pretty well at the time, and he was favoring his back, his hips, and understanding that he was probably going to be very limited on what he was going to be able to do. So capturing the spotlight and stealing the show was a point that both Randy and I want to make.
Yeah.
And putting together something that the wrestling fans and also the wrestlers at the time never saw a match. You know, we had so many false finishes.
Right.
You know, 20 some plus false finishes in the course of a match that went, I think, 17 minutes.
Yeah.
And that sort of not knowing afterwards the notoriety, the accolades, you know, and even to this date here, what is it, 28, 29 years later, that, you know, like yourself and everybody else, they still talk about it.
Well, I think what's interesting is you had performed on such a tremendous level for so long. The series with Ric Flair, all of the matches that you had leading up to that. But this was on a stage in front of 93,000 people and available all over the world. So it really did escalate to something very magical.
Well, going in, we had an idea of the scope of how big this show was going to be. So with that in mind, we had the onset premise to let's steal this thing.
Yeah. Run like you did.
But like I said earlier, never knowing that it would still be talked about so many years later.
Yeah.
We never knew that.
Well, you know, you talk about stealing the show, and not only would you do that at WrestleMania 3, but in Houston, Texas at WrestleMania 25, when you had a matchup with Chris Jericho, and quite frankly, I was there live in attendance.
Yeah.
That was one of the highlights of the night, some 22 years later, getting back in the ring.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that? Were you knew you had a lot to, I guess, prove, if you will, and you went in and proved and then some.
Well, you know, one of the biggest things that I always had in my mind was when I got out of the business, I realized that the last couple of years in the early 90s, when I got out in 94, but in the early 90s, my legs were not quite like, you know, when I was younger. And that's just Mother Nature. And that's, you know, the boxers say the first thing that goes to their legs. You know, they get in the 5th, 6th round and, you know, you can't move as well. So I realized that. Then I had a back injury. I had a herniated disc. And I said, you know, I put in 20 years. I've had over 6,000 matches. And I said, you know, it was time for me to bow out. But then coming back at WrestleMania 25 and asked to, I always wanted to leave the impression with the fans of the way they remembered me. And I was wondering when I came back 22 years later, WrestleMania 25, could I at least be somewhat of the Ricky Steamboat that the fans remembered me by? And so I was able to have some classic moments, and the fans got with it. And I was very fortunate to be able to pull it off, even at that, you know, I was in my late 50s.
You know, it didn't matter. That match was fantastic, but it also led to a matchup the next month between you and Jericho, and more that you weren't quite expecting.
No, you know, Vince saw that. He looked at me and he said, "Hey, you old fart, you still got it." You know, so that led up to a one-on-one matchup at
Backlash.
Backlash. Thank you. which then led on to an overseas tour
Wow.
in the Orient,
Yeah.
which then coming back to the States led up of several matches in the Carolinas area. You know, the crew was coming back to the States, and we were going to
Back to your roots.
yeah, and it was a great experience. You know, that one match in WrestleMania 25 led to what nobody ever thought, including me, maybe another dozen or so. Jericho, what a guy! He took care of this old guy in the ring, you know, and we did have some shining moments, especially in the Carolinas, you know, where I had some really good stomping and firm roots of my past there, and doing very well there. That's actually where I started working with Ric Flair in the Carolinas, and fans were behind me. You know, it was just so good, and Jericho realizing this, he you know, he really brought the shine back.
Yeah. Well, Ricky, thank you so much for all that you've done in professional wrestling and continue to do. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on this show and to be sitting here talking to you. And we look forward to talking to you again here soon on the Pro Wrestling Report. Thanks a lot.
All right, Damien, it's great to have you with me and to do this once again. You know, it brings back great memories.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.